Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Sneaker History Podcast. We're doing something a little bit different today, but I think you guys will like it. I've got noted author Pete Croatto here with me, and Pete wrote this awesome book, From Hang Time to Prime Time. And this is a book that's really about the history of how the NBA became the NBA as it is today. And what I figured is we'll get to know Pete, the author. We'll get to know who his allegiances are for. We'll have him dive a little bit, not only into the book, but a piece on Grantland that kind of served as this prequel to this. And then we'll just let the conversation go where it may. Pete, how are you this morning?
I'm doing well, Rohit. Thanks for having me on. It's been, yeah, happy to be here.
Excellent. Now, I see you're wearing the Jazz hat, but I was wondering, are you still in Ithaca, New York, and are you a Knicks fan?
Yeah, it's actually a New Orleans Jazz
Oh,
hat.
New Orleans, sorry.
No, it's old school. Mitchell and Ness. Let's see. Yeah, I've been in Central New York for a little over 5 years now, and actually no, close to six. But I grew up in Central New Jersey. Spent probably the first 35 years of my life in and around that area. And I grew up a Knicks fan, but after the Knicks refused to sign Jeremy Lin, I parted ways amicably with the Dolan family. And so now, I mean, I guess you could say I'm a 76ers fan, but
Nice.
really, as I've told a lot of people, I just love I'm very much an NBA a polyglot. I kind of just if a game is on, and the announcers are good, I'm in. So I'm very lucky. In Ithaca, we get MSG.
Hmm.
Which has Mike Breen and Walt Frazier calling the games, and the Knicks are actually good for the first time in
Knock on wood.
yeah, forever. And we also have the Yes Network. So and the Nets have been tearing it up of late. And trying to think, you have a really good broadcast team of led by Ian Eagle. I'm sorry, who's great. So yeah, it's I'm in good shape here. Plus you have TNT and ABC. So yeah, I'm never far from being entertained.
No, for sure. And I think we kind of live in that golden era now where things like League Pass make all these games more readily available for us.
Yeah.
Similar to you, I'm kind of in the NBA version of Big Love as well. When we first immigrated to the States, we lived right across the street from the Space Needle. So we were big
Oh,
Supersonics
nice.
fans. And then because my parents were contractors in the IT industry, we actually moved to rural Missouri. And I was just like, you know what? I'm just going to adopt the league because there was so much college basketball around me. And it's not necessarily for me, but I think to your point, if there's a orange ball and there's good commentators, I will just sit down and watch.
Yeah.
So that was just kind of an eye-opening experience in the sense, but at the same time, I think to your point, it made me a stronger basketball fan.
hmm No, absolutely. Look, that's the thing. I'm 43 now, and I really think that being a fan, being a die-hard, like live and die with each game, that's a young man's game.
For
And
sure.
and I'm married, I have a daughter, we have a mortgage. Being a fan and grinding your teeth with each game, it becomes a lot harder to do when you have adult responsibility. So I don't know. There's enough pressure in this world. So to me, to sit down and watch just a great game, or even increasingly any game, is such a relief. It's such a balm for me to just sit and watch. Kyrie Irving one night, and then Giannis another night, or
Right.
or even just going and reading tweets, or going back and reading great books. I mean, about basketball. That is frequently something that I find to be very comforting. So yeah, it's I don't know. Maybe at some point I'll get back to being a fan of a team, but right now I'm just really happy just watching a player do great things and not hating that player because they're torching my team for
Exactly.
35 points or 40 points. Like, I don't know, as a Knicks fan, I used to hate Michael Jordan. And I realize now, like, what a waste that was, because I didn't get a chance to enjoy Michael Jordan. I was so busy hating Michael Jordan that it was that I didn't get a chance to savor what I was watching. And I don't want to make that mistake. I don't want to make that mistake again.
No, I think that is very astute on your part because I think our generation, in a sense, is going through that with LeBron James, where you just have to
Hmm.
respect the totality of the work.
Yep.
And with the unfortunate passing of Kobe Bryant, in a sense, I think that awoke a lot of, I wouldn't say feelings of love, but everybody slowly started to appreciate what Kobe gave us. And I think
Hmm.
one thing that is kind of an underlying theme of your book, once again, from hang time to prime time, was the fact that what to me makes the NBA and the fact that it's almost its own league is the theater aspect of it. I've had this conversation many times with people, and I'm sure you have as well. The one advantage the NBA always seems to have over
Hmm.
its competitors, at least domestically, is the fact that it's the only major American sports league that there's no covering of the face of the players. So you're getting
Hmm.
that theater component to it.
Yeah.
And I think as an audience member, to your point, there is something a little bit extra of watching, let's say, an awesome Kyrie handle or a sick
Hmm.
layup, and then he snarls afterward. And you can almost see that as an amplification of the point he wanted to make, where he's just like, I'm that damn good. I'm
Hmm.
fucking awesome. And here's just me letting you know how great I am. So
Yeah.
that is just fascinating to me. And that's why I think I keep coming back to the sport as well.
Yeah, no, I mean that's there is no the drama is right there in front of you.
Yeah.
And it is and the thing that is also great about the NBA and this started in the 1980s with CBS and then later with NBC and going forward is just the people the men and women who direct these games, produce them, run operate the cameras or are in the control room. They treat these games like they're theater. There are close-ups. There are, the camera doesn't just stay in one spot. It is a game where you grow very connected to these players. I remember. I mean, a distinct memory I have growing up as a Knicks fan is whenever Patrick Ewing would shoot a free throw, he would be sopping in sweat, and you could actually see the drips of sweat coming off his chin as he prepared to shoot another free throw. And that sounds like maybe something that's disgusting, but to me, that just shows that just shows you just how connected we are to these players. I said before about Kyrie and James Harden, all these players that I think one reason why we're so connected to them is that we get to see them. We see their faces. We see their body language. They're not covered, as you said. They're not covered in pads or like in baseball. They're not sitting down 80% of the time. So to me, the NBA is the reason why it translates so well to television. Is because it translates so well to television for those reasons, but it also translates so well to social media because we get to know these players, and the players are also very proactive in being on social media, and that also, but that goes in line to what the NBA is all about. It's always been a players' league. It's always been about individuals, and to me, it's that makes the league more entertaining because I do think the players are able to speak for themselves and express themselves more so than in any other major American sport.
Right. And it's funny you mentioned that because I was going through the book again last night, and there was a passage that kind of stuck out in my mind,
Hmm.
especially around, I guess, the CBS way of doing things versus what NBC kind of did. And I think it
Hmm.
was Dick Stockton that said, if I'm watching TV and I see a commercial that says, up next, we've got Allen Iverson versus Shaq, what the hell does that mean? In a way, I think that lets you know everything
Yeah,
because of how well the
yeah,
NBA has done their job. And I know that it was almost set in a flippant tone, but I'm sure somewhere David Stern is smiling because he knows the answer to that. And more importantly, his audience knows the answer to that. We've got a mountain of a man against a man who has the heart the size of a mountain. And that's all you need to know. And that's
exactly,
perfect. That gets you in the
exactly.
game.
That tells you a storyline in 3 seconds. That
Yes.
that and the other thing too is this the that I and and yeah, you're right. Dick Stock did say that in a very flippant tone because he was an announcer at CBS, and CBS was about the Boston Celtics versus the Los Angeles Lakers, and Larry and Magic were sort of secondary, were played off of that. But to me, I think what the NBA and NBC did was, yeah, I mean, it's not it may rankle you if you're a hardcore die in the wool basketball fan, but it's brilliant because it, as you said, it tells you everything you need to know. But also, how often do we go to when we used to go to the movies? Did we see a movie that came out from Warner Brothers or came out from, I don't know, a studio? We went to the movies to see a Tom Cruise movie or a Julia Roberts movie, or especially the 1980s and 1990s. We're all America has always been about stars. So why not gear that with a sports team? And the other thing is this: if you're a young fan who doesn't have any familiarity with a sport, I mean, and I'm speaking from personal experience here. A player is how you get into a game.
Right.
I was a Kevin McHale fan first, and a Patrick Ewing fan first, and a little bit of a Michael Jordan fan first, and those players got me into the game. And once you have a player, I think that you gravitate toward, then the rest is easy. Then the game sells itself. So
Right.
yeah, I really do think that is that was just a brilliant marketing scheme from the NBA, because that was all Dick Stockton. I'm not, pardon me, that's Dick Ebersol with NBC. He grew
Right.
up. He was part of it. Came from NBC Entertainment, and he was all about, we have to build this around stars. We have to build this around personalities. And David Stern was the same way. And really, that's how the league still is. I mean, if you look at, we know this game has more for this, all the stars in the NBA for the most part. We know them we know them on a first name basis or by their nicknames. Kyrie. If I say Kyrie and you're a basketball fan, you know it's Kyrie Irving.
Yep.
The same way if I say Giannis, like, you know who I'm talking about. There's no like, well, is it Giannis Johnson or Giannis, like,
I think it might be Giannis Jenkins who owes me
yeah.
$12 from like fourth grade.
Yeah, there's one Giannis, and that's the beauty of this game, is that there's that familiarity. And the other thing too is this: if you like, basketball is still going to be a team game. You're still going to have 10 players on the court. You're still going to have the ball move around. But again, so if you're an old school basketball fan, or if you're a traditional basketball fan, there's still that stuff for you. But if you're a kid, if you're 10, 11, 12 years old, like, those names are what's going to get you into, or is what's going to excite you, not the fact that, oh well, Kyrie Irving used that screen really well, and then he was able to pull for a 15-foot jumper. That is the strategist will like that, but for the kid, for the casual fan, for the person who's maybe just watching an NBA Finals game for the first time, they're going to know the stars, and that's served the NBA well for decades now.
Yep. And I'll use that segue to kind of talk about one of the first things that I found really interesting about your book. But
Mm-hmm.
even prior to your book, you wrote this beautiful article in 2013, and correct me if
Mm-hmm.
I get the date wrong, around the All-Star anthem,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yes.
specifically a big star, probably in his prime, Marvin Gaye, singing what I think some people consider to be the finest rendition of the national anthem.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for me, reading that article again in anticipation of this interview, it truly showcased how pivotal that moment was, because
Mm-hmm.
that is that intersection of popular culture and basketball melding as one, almost
Mm-hmm.
collaborating in an alley oop sense, because he threw the ball so high with that beautiful rendition. And it was just the easy part for the NBA to say, okay, now all we have to do is put something out there that's viewable and that's competitive. And I just wanted you to talk a little bit about that, because it is one of those pivotal moments in basketball mythology.
Mm-hmm. No, you said it perfectly. I really do believe that anthem is the borderline between the old NBA and the new NBA, the NBA that we know now, because that made it very clear that the NBA was going to be about giving you a good time. It was going to be about entertaining. It was going to be about reflecting who was on the court, and who was going to watch this game. It was going to cater to a younger audience. So that anthem was absolutely pivotal in charting the course for the new NBA, the NBA that we see now. And the funny part about it is that it really wasn't planned. The NBA, the Lakers wanted Lionel Richie, and Lon Rosen, who's the director of promotions for the Lakers, called the NBA office and said, told the NBA, oh yeah, we're going to get Lionel Richie. And Lionel Richie at the time was a big star, and the person who answered the phone at the NBA said, who's Lionel Richie? Who's that? So with that out of the way, the Lakers went with Marvin Gaye, who was not only a Motown legend, but he was somebody who was back in the limelight because of Sexual Healing, which was a big hit in '83 around the time of the anthem. So yeah, so and also the Lakers, the Lakers, the NBA didn't really have any idea what he was going to what Marvin Gaye was going to do. They, he had this he did a run through during the All Star game practice the day before, which nearly went off the rails because the rendition was way too long, and Lon Rosen, who was there, was like, "Hey, you got to shorten this up," and he tried to talk to Marvin Gaye about that, and Marvin kept turning away from him, like literally going around in circles to avoid talking to Lon Rosen. So there was a lot of doubt as to if how this is going to happen. And then Marvin Gaye takes his sweet ass time getting to the forum, shows up 5 minutes before the anthem. So there was a lot of question marks about this, and there was yeah, when it happened, there were a lot of naysayers, but if you look at the naysayers, it was people that were older, white, middle aged. Like if you look at the funny thing to do is to go on newspapers.com and look at the reaction from the sports
Yep.
columnists from back in the day, and
Yep.
inevitably it's all guys that look like me or look like my dad, and they're just like, oh, this was terrible. This was, but it was a sign of something new, and it was exciting, and it got people talking in a good way, and that's what the
Mhm.
NBA needed, and the NBA rode that energy and just took it to the next level, and it also, of course, helped immensely that hip hop was starting to gain traction, and rap is becoming this new musical genre that's emerging. So it was a perfect storm, and the NBA had the common sense to be like, you know what, we're gonna ride this. Like, this is exactly what we want. We want to cater to a hipper audience, a younger audience, and we want this to be fun. This wasn't like baseball. This wasn't like football. It was something completely different. And here we are, for 38 years later, and this is
Yeah.
nothing has really changed. It's amazing.
Yeah. Not at all. And
Yeah.
to your point, this is a young person's league. It's evident
Mm-hmm.
in the promotion, it's
Yep.
evident in the marketing, it's evident in how they brand stars. And it was also interesting to me, kind of going back through the article. Two passages that you wrote
Okay.
really stuck out with me. One
Mm-hmm.
was the quote that Pat Riley had, where he
Mm-hmm.
goes, "When Marvin Gaye took off, I morphed into an American." And
Mm-hmm.
that to me is saying something because Pat Riley is the Don. He's the
Yep.
Godfather. He
Yep.
never met a corporate pitch that he hasn't disliked. And for him to say, I felt so strongly to convert to the ties of patriotism because of how awesome, how much of a heat check that national anthem
Mm-hmm.
was really probably the lasting legacy. And then the last passage where you're talking, I think it's Rosen kind of taking it all in. Then he sees somebody who's just nodding along with everything and is buying in. And then you have that perfect last sentence of, and then David Stern became commissioner.
Yeah.
And that, once again, shameless plug, is the origin story in a sense for David Stern, who, as you and I were chatting prior
Mm-hmm.
to recording, I had kind of made this comment that he's probably the greatest New York point guard that we never knew about, in the sense that, yes, he played, and I think he had a knee injury in one of his games, which forced him to retire.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when, like, I think his passion took over even more because he couldn't physically play on that passion.
Yeah.
But it's one of those things where as you're reading this book, you are looking at the fact that David Stern was always able to read the room a little bit better than everybody else. He was always able to kind of figure out how the ebbs and flows of the waves are going to go for his
Mm-hmm.
league,
Mm-hmm.
and he knew what to prioritize. So talk to me a little bit about Stern as this visionary, because I don't want to give everything away because we
Right.
want people to buy the book, but give me almost like an amuse-bouche, if you will, of
Oh,
David
okay.
Stern's brilliance.
Oh, how amusing. Yeah, no, no, very well put. David Stern and me. Look, I think the key to David Stern's ability as a marketer and somebody who was able to put the league in the best light and who knew what the league could be was that he was just a giant NBA fan. I mean, he grew up going to Knicks games with his dad. I mean, he would be able to get in with like a student ID card, and like a 25-cent tip to the usher to get the good seats at Madison Square Garden. Back in the 50s. So that's the thing. He loved the NBA. He loved it. He loved basketball, and he also saw what the league could be. He had passion, and the thing with David Stern is that he he knew what was he understood, and this is an overused word, but I'm going to use it. But I think David Stern understood optics better than any major NBA commissioner in modern day history. He knew the value of television. He understood that, to piggyback on the point we made earlier, he understood the value of stars. He understood that, look, if you have two shitty teams that are playing, okay, well, you know what? Like, maybe the San Diego Clippers don't have anyone playing, but if they're playing the Los Angeles Lakers, like, focus on Magic Johnson, focus on Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Like, he understood that there was an entertainment side to the league that had to be, for lack of a better term, exploited and had to be amplified. And I think that's one reason with Marvin Gaye's anthem. The fact that I put that in there is because that set the tone for everything after. Because he absolutely understood that to get people interested in the league, it had to be presented in the best possible light. And that meant the best possible light on television, but it also meant turning it into entertainment. And there's a scene later in the book where he's talking to a bunch of owners about the Palace at Auburn Hills, and he's going on about, he's talking to these executives, these GMs and owners, and saying, like, look, we're in the entertainment business. We're not in the basketball business. This is entertainment. So under David Stern, everything was pretty much like Disney. The arenas were amusement parks. If you're going to an NBA game, you're going to be entertained. You weren't just going to go and sit and watch a basketball game. So when you bring back that moment with David Stern, I think that encapsulates his philosophy perfectly, because he was somebody who saw the NBA as more than just a sports league. And to survive, it couldn't be just a sports league.
Yep. No, I mean, I think that is probably as great of a summation as we can get given our short time. But one thing I know right now, I'm captivated in a sense, because one of my go-to binge shows on Netflix is Drive to Survive,
Okay.
the Formula One show. And to
Okay.
me, it's almost, lack of a better term, a victory lap of David Stern's policies, because
Yes.
this is something that is foreign to us from an American perspective. It's recently made some headway, and now we're slowly falling in love with the sport because of the fact that it's a lot of the NBA's playbook of, here are our drivers. And granted, we're not going to be able to see the drivers when they're actually in their actual competition because of the helmets, but we are going to bombard you with their faces when they're not on the track. We're going to give
Right.
you everything you need to know about their personality. And it's something, as I'm watching this show, I'm like, David Stern kind of godfathered this. So at very minimum, we should get that executive produced by David Stern, because he kind of outlined that blueprint in a sense. But the other thing I think will be David Stern's legacy is this. Prior to Stern kind of coming to the forefront, we had Magic and Bird. And
Yeah.
I think David Stern became the commissioner of the NBA in February of 1984. And I believe Jordan got drafted a couple months later.
Yeah.
So to me, those two are almost the picking up of the torch, if you will, from Magic and Larry, because
Yes.
Magic and Larry competed, but then they also realized the benefit of us is also working together in terms of ushering this league in. And I think while Jordan and Stern didn't have as many quote unquote conflicts, I think the only thing I could think of is the banned shoe ad, which there's a really funny line, as you were talking about in your book, about Stern is meeting with somebody from Nike, and the thing Stern tells that kid is, great, my kid thinks I'm an asshole because I won't let him wear the sneaker. So it's fantastic to me, because rightfully so, we give a Jordan a lot of credit for kind of picking up the baton from Magic and Larry and ushering in this new era. But then at the same time, I think he can't have done it alone, because David Stern had to be his Phil Jackson in a sense before the actual Phil Jackson got there.
No, absolutely. So. David Stern provided the stage for the entertainers to perform. I think it's probably the best way to put it. I mean, and he, because look, Larry and Magic were going to get were great players. So was Michael Jordan, but they needed a stage, and they needed people to come see them. Like, I don't know, there are plenty of entertainers in this world who are brilliant, plenty of authors, plenty of singers, painters, but they don't have an audience. There's no one that's coming to see them. And David Stern got asses into the seats, and he got it
Yep.
by getting the best out of television coverage. He did it by making the merchandise personality driven and flashy and versatile. He did it by he did it by not digging in his heels with stuff like Nike. I mean, you know what? If the shoe's going to sell and it's going to elevate his game, great. You know what? Who cares if the colors are quote unquote against regulation? That's the thing. I think David Stern is really the if you look at if you compare the NBA to a Hollywood system, like David Stern is like Louis B. Mayer
Yep.
and Jack Warner, like these studio moguls, and Larry Bird is maybe Clark Gable, and
Hmm.
Magic Johnson is
Fred Astaire and
Fred
Sons.
Astaire, Gary Cooper. Like that's the beauty of to me that's the beauty of the NBA, is that or what I'm sorry, of David Stern's ability, is that he got people to care. He not only I mean he got I mean that's the one thing about this book that I thought was interesting in terms of researching, is that David Stern not only got like you and me to care, and millions of other people to care about the NBA, and buy the gear and the videos
Yep.
and everything, but he got everyone working for him just about to care. And that's the thing. Like he was really, in a lot of ways, he was almost like a preacher, just
Yep.
kind of like spreading the gospel of the NBA. And he did it. I mean, if you look at the NBA's place in the world, I think it's very clear that his mission um, was a rousing success.
Absolutely. And it's something you said in your book as well, is when he died in January 1st of 2020, which, holy crap, that's one of those deaths that we
Hmm.
forget about, how which
Yeah.
was a precursor to how shitty our year was going to be. You mentioned the fact that a lot of people lost their NBA dad, so to speak,
Yeah.
because of that loyalty he inspired from everybody. Like,
Hmm.
he was at times a very flawed individual. He may have been a bit too stubborn for his own liking, but the one thing I can always say about David Stern is he always had the affection and he always had the hearts and minds of those that truly backed him. And
Yes.
in their mind, he could do no wrong.
Yes. One of the sources I spoke to said this perfectly about David Stern. He said that, and this is someone who worked for the NBA for years. He said that David Stern was the best boss and the worst boss I ever had. And yeah, he had a relentless work ethic. He was never satisfied. He was blunt to the point of being offensive. I think if you put him in today's work environment, he would be in HR half the week.
Yes.
But he was somebody who, if he was somebody who got everyone to care, and because he cared more than everybody. He was not one of those bosses who was in by 9, out by 5, didn't give a shit, only cared about the bonus that he got each year. He was deeply invested in this, and he was also deeply invested in his employees. Like, if you worked hard for him and you were up to the task of making the NBA great, David Stern was the best ally you could ever have. I mean, he was somebody you know, who was, yes, he had this prickly demeanor, and he was absolutely one of those guys that you did not want to fuck with, because he would either eviscerate you like in a meeting, or he would take you like to his office and dress you down. But he was also somebody that cared deeply about his employees. I mean, I think the NBA to him was really a second family.
Yep.
And in talking to people for this book, there were people who said like, yeah, David, if I feel like I can call David Stern now, and he could help me out. Or if I was in a jam, like he would be the first person I called. It was a weird kind of loyalty, and not everybody got that loyalty. I mean,
Yep.
I'm not David Stern's publicist, but what was striking to me was just how many people David Stern touched. And
Yep.
it's and you're right. When he died, it's kind of fit. No death is ever really fitting, but I think what's so weird about his death is that he died, and then about 2 weeks later, Kobe Bryant dies in that horrible helicopter accident.
Right.
And those two deaths, to me, I think, kind of symbolize what the NBA had become. Because David Stern's death, I mean, he was mourned, of course, but Kobe Bryant passed away, and his mourning it's still being felt, and I think that just goes to show you how what the job that David Stern did in turning players into these I'm not even nationwide, worldwide
International.
symbols.
Yep.
I mean, that's the thing. And look, and Kobe Bryant was not exactly a warm and cuddly dude who was, you know, who was gonna, who was, kissing babies and shaking hands. But I think but David Stern's NBA branding machine was really shown. You really saw the force of it in January 2020 because he passes away, and yeah, they're the testimonials and the people that are in the mourning. But when Kobe Bryant dies, it was something else entirely, and that impact is a direct result of, I think, of David Stern's infrastructure and how he allowed new stars to come new stars to arrive and new stars to fall, and the cycle keeps repeating itself. So it's yeah, 2020 was a bad year, but it's funny, those two deaths really started us off, and then it was just everything just got worse after that.
It's all downhill from there. Now,
Absolutely.
I'll hopefully use this to transition into something a little bit sunnier. We are the Sneaker History Podcast, so
Yes.
I can't think of something more radiant and more incandescent with joy than one Walt Clyde Frazier. And for a lot of people, our image of him now is the gentleman that uses the $5 words when a $1 word would suffice, and we love him for it. And he's
Yes, we
also
do.
got that touch of gray money. But
Yes.
talk to us about Walt Frazier as the sneaker salesman.
Right. No, I love Walt, and it's funny. Even in the interview, he was the same way. I mean,
Yeah.
the guy's ebullient, and it's that's the one of the fun things about this book was like, yeah, the Walt Frazier I'm talking to is pretty much the one that's trading barbs with Mike Breen. No, Walt Frazier is a I think an overlooked figure in basketball sneaker history because he was really the first NBA player to have his own major shoe deal, and the thing about what's great about Walt is that those Cloud Pumas, and I have a reissue pair up in
Oh,
my
awesome.
bedroom. I didn't do well in the color scheme. It's yellow on turquoise, so
Okay.
they're not great, but anyway, I'll make up for that.
Oh, no, 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 no. I feel like there's nothing more indicative of Walt Frazier than
Yeah,
yellow and turquoise.
exactly. Yeah, but I'm not Walt
You're,
Frazier, so I don't pull them off.
you're good. You're good.
But anyway, what was great about those shoes is that, I mean, they had such crossover appeal because not only were they being worn on the court, but they were fashion statements. And as time went on, the hip hop community was wearing them. They were being worn by by the b boys and the break dancers and this sort of new non basketball clientele. And so like the shoes kind of had a rebirth. They went from being something that was not just something you would wear in a basketball court. It wasn't just a Chuck Taylor All Star. And another shoe that was like that had this crossover appeal and is still sort of, I think, revered by sneakerheads are the Jabars.
Yep.
Because the Jabars, were I think Bobito Garcia in his great book on Where'd You Get Those cites
Yes.
the Jabars as being sort of the first Adidas shoe that was loved by the hip hop community. So like that was that was another example of a shoe having like this tremendous crossover appeal. And we all talk about the Air Jordans as we rightfully should. They were game changers, and they became high fashion, but I think but to me the Clydes and to a lesser extent the Jabars really set the stage for the basketball sneaker as as a fashion piece, as fashion footwear. And then by the time and then when the Jordans hit and in 84, 84, 85, like it's all over. Like it's a completely different ballgame after that.
Yeah. And that's something I kind of wanted you to briefly touch on because before we got to Jordan, Nike
Mm-hmm.
kind of had this strategy, so to speak, of okay, this is how we're going to break into the basketball
Mm-hmm.
market. And like I said, please correct me if I'm wrong. The initial mentality was let's go after the coaches because they were kind of the gatekeepers of what
Yeah.
each team wore.
Mm-hmm. It was with colleges. It was the coaches, definitely.
Okay.
And then, but really, Nike really went all out on the NBA. What they were trying to compete with
Yeah.
Converse. So what Nike did was they had something that was called the Pro Club, which was
Yes.
they would just get certain they would sign up certain players of teams and kind of put them in this elite group. So it was like folks like Moses Malone and George Gervin and Phil Chenier and Paul Westphal, like all these great to legendary players who were part of this elite group. And part of that group was that, like, not only did you get shoes, but you got perks. Like you got taken away to a nice fancy resort. You'd get paid to wear the shoes, like not just a flat rate, but also a percentage of the shoes that were sold. So Nike not only did that, but they started going after everybody because as someone told me, I think it was who was it? As a Nike executive told me, like, they got the bench players too because
Yep.
when you're watching TV, like, guess what you're seeing on the TV? The bench players, they're wearing the swoosh. So Nike did this for a number of years, and then it just became inordinately expensive because you were paying 50, 60, 40, 50 players who are in this pro club, which is getting bigger by the year, a
Hmm.
giant sum of money. Some of these players are getting more money because they're bigger. You're also giving, all these scrubs a nice paycheck every year for wearing their shoes. It just became completely expensive. So in '84, Nike decided to go smaller, not bigger. So they wanted to focus on a number of players instead of everybody. And so what they did was, they winnowed it down to a few select players, and then they went after Jordan. They went after the hot new rookie, and it was one of those things that just where everything aligned. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think we talked about this earlier, like it's sort of a chicken and the egg thing,
Yep.
with Jordan. But I mean, I really do think though that Jordan being as spectacular as he was makes the shoe.
Yep.
If Jordan is Sidney Moncrief or Clyde
David
Drexler,
Thompson.
David Thompson, it's not the same. He was Jordan was a transcendent player, and not only that, but he was somebody who was. David Halberson makes this remark in his book that he was a good-looking dude.
Yes.
He was classic. He was quote unquote beautiful, and that's the thing. He was 6'6", a good size. He had the fine features. He had the terrific skin. He was a beautiful guy. So
Yep.
having those aesthetics in place, having the shoe, having the game to go with all of that, it all lined up perfectly. And the reason why I think shoes didn't really take off as much as they did was, you didn't have the marketing abilities, the marketing mindset that Nike had, but the players weren't like Jordan. Clyde Frazier was a great player, and he was certainly a fashion plate, but he was. He was more of a he didn't have Jordan's game. He was a defensive guy. He was a point guard. He was team
Right.
first. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, he's 7'1", 7'2". It's hard to imagine yourself as a big dude, shooting a hook shot from 9 feet high. So Michael comes along, and it's just this perfect. It was just perfect because he's also marketed as an individual too. That's the key.
Hmm.
Like, Larry and Magic, yeah, they had the weapons, but they were always Larry and Magic. And
Yep.
Dr. J had his shoe, but it wasn't a Dr. J shoe. It was the Conference All Star. So you didn't really get a chance. You didn't really get that feeling that it was his shoe. This was unequivocally Jordan's shoe. It was his
Right.
shoe. He wasn't part of a consortium of other players. It was his shoe and his shoe alone. And the fact that the shoe looked the way that it looked, the fact that Jordan looked the way that he looked, that he played the way that he played, it was a perfect storm. And I'm not sure you're ever going to see. And I mean, you never want to say never, but I cannot imagine things like that happening again. It's too. It's really one of those magical moments.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of those things when inevitably you listen to any sort of sports media nowadays, especially if it's basketball centric, you're going to have that moment where you're just going to grit your teeth and go through the, okay, LeBron or Jordan thing. And I think
Yeah.
one disadvantage LeBron has that Jordan never faced was the fact that Jordan never had a template to follow
Yes.
like LeBron has had to.
Mm-hmm.
And to
Mm-hmm.
your point, we saw semblances of a template because we kind of knew what to expect from a Dr. J.
Yeah.
We knew the competitiveness of a Magic Larry
Mm-hmm.
rivalry, but it was never something that Jordan had to hit on every single marker the same way LeBron does. And I
Right.
think that's
Right.
where Jordan ultimately will always kind of have that moral upper hand in a sense because of
Mm-hmm.
the fact that no matter how great LeBron is, and I think LeBron is fantastic,
Yeah.
he will always have to chase that ghost. Hell, they made
Yep.
a chasing ghost colorway for one of LeBron's sneakers, and
Yeah.
even he's acknowledging that. But
Yeah.
that's where I think the Jordan argument will cause him to win, unless until LeBron gets 6 titles, and then you start having the nuances of the conversation.
Yeah.
But that'll be for another podcast for another day.
No, the
I will
key.
say,
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Mhm.
Go ahead.
No, please.
Yeah. The key too with and this is in the book too. The key with Jordan is that Jordan was a clean slate.
Yes.
Jordan never really said anything political. He wasn't advocating for social change. He came along at the right time in the '80s, which was all about
It's the Alex
ripple.
P. Keaton era, in a
Yeah,
sense.
it was ripple free imagery.
Yep.
And with LeBron James, one reason why I love LeBron James is that he is such an advocate. Is that he is someone who identifies himself as not just a basketball player, but as a black man in America, and and he's someone who sees himself as that, and addresses those concerns. And Michael Jordan never did that. Michael Jordan was really apolitical, and he was somebody who didn't have that agenda. And I think there's another thing too is that Michael Jordan was all about basketball. And
Yes.
with LeBron James, yes, he's a wonderful basketball player, and he's a top 10 all time talent. I'm not gonna. So anyone who's listening, I'm not. I'm Team LeBron as a ball player,
Yep.
but we're seeing we are. But I think with LeBron, we know who he is as a person. We know what he cares about. We know what angers him, what drives him beyond the basketball court. Michael Jordan never gave us that problem. So you could assign anything you wanted to Michael Jordan, and you could be you could be I think of the typical 50-year-old male with a beer in his hand on an easy chair. That
Yep.
guy could say that Michael Jordan's a hell of a basketball player. I don't think that you're not going to see that with LeBron James.
Yes. That,
So
in a sense, Michael Jordan is greatest common denominator good in the fact that you're like,
yeah.
okay, he's just good. We don't want to talk about it.
Hmm.
But there is that kind of nagging feeling, and you allude to it in your book
Hmm.
because you cite a GQ interview that Jordan had given
Yeah.
where he felt like he had to be on the straight and narrow
Yeah.
always because his nightmare was, I think, robbing a bank, doing a line of
Hmm.
cocaine, and he was
Hmm.
just worried that would cause his empire to fall. And in a sense, that's probably his chief motivation at the time of that interview is like, I cannot fuck up the bag, so to speak.
Yeah. No. I mean, and that's the thing too. Look, I mean, now back in the 1980s and the 1990s, being an outspoken athlete was really something that had fallen out of favor, and it was also something that could end a career. So that's a
Yes.
legitimate. So yeah, I mean, people blast Michael Jordan for being like, well, he wasn't political enough, or he wasn't this, but it's like, well, he had a lot to lose, and it's not like now where if you are outspoken, I never want to say there's not a consequence, but the consequences aren't nearly as grave as they would have been in 1988 or 1989 or 1990. I mean, he very well could have been one of those players where he could have been just out of the league because like, well, this is too hot for us to handle. And
Yep.
he had, and that's the thing, at that time, and you alluded to this earlier, this is all new. So there was no, Dr. J never had this kind of celebrity, had this kind of fandom. This is all new. This is all new, and for us to play Monday morning quarterback 30 years later, like, well, I would have done this or I would have said that. You don't know, like, no,
Yep.
it was all new and it was all coming at him, and the fact that he handled it as a businessman and as somebody like who handled it in a way as to what could project the best image. That's a pretty shrewd play for someone in their 20s. I mean,
Yep.
because he could have let that all go to his head and fuck shit up, but like he kept it on the straight and narrow, and you know what? It worked. I mean, he came out of it. I think as he came out of it pretty okay.
Yep. Yes, he did. No. And I was going to say this. So we touched on sneakers, which was
Hmm.
kind of at its pomp and circumstance in the 80s.
Yeah.
Before we go, I would love to get your thoughts because, once
Hmm.
again, you wrote this great book,
Thank
From
you.
Hang Time to Prime Time. Yeah, that's the shameless Mick Foley fan in me that I'm just going to give you a shameless plug every
Appreciate
five
that.
minutes if I can. Talk to me about how you think David Stern would view something like NBA Twitter or NBA Top Shot, because I think, once again, going into your theme of the NBA always does new better than any other league.
Hmm.
I think those are the two things that have almost become extensions of his legacy, because now
Yeah.
the NBA is probably as much of a second screen experience as any sport because of the personalities that don't even have any sort of professional affiliation with the game. It's
Hmm.
bloggers, it's funny people online that seem to care more about this sport than any other.
Yeah.
And then also this Top Shot thing, which you and I touched on briefly in
Yeah.
our pre-recording meeting, and how it's kind of become the evolutionary trading card.
I honestly, here's the thing. As time went on, I talked to people about this for the book. You know, David Stern hardened a little bit. You know, he wasn't as prescient as he was back in the 80s, and that, I think that's just a byproduct of getting older. You know, you do something for 30 years,
Yep.
you're gonna go with the familiar. You're gonna
You get
think,
fixed.
yeah. But I do think that David Stern, if he had surrounded himself with the right people, and he always did that, I think he would have come around to both of those things. I think he would have seen Twitter and he would have seen Top Shot as just, again, like he would have recognized them as like, okay, well, you know what, NBA Twitter, that's now what the newspaper journalists were in the 1980s, and then we have to like treat them as, we have to kind of give them what they want. We have to work with them. He would embrace that. And Top Shot's the same thing. I mean, the NBA was almost revolutionary in how it treated basketball and how it treated sporting cards. Going
Hmm.
back, I'm dating myself here, but when Skybox came out, they were the first cards with computer graphics on them. That was a huge deal. It had a lot of buzz. They also did the cards internally, so the money went all to them. It wasn't like handled by Tops, or it came right to them. I mean, they understood the cards could be marketing and could be used to keep to make them money. So I honestly think David Stern would have seen these two things, and maybe he would have been like, well, that's kind of weird, or that's odd, because I'm in my 70s now, and I don't get what these kids are doing. But I
Right.
honestly think he would have noticed, like, oh yeah, this is just a spin on the journalists of the 1970s, and working with them. And Top Shot basically is what basketball cards were in the 1980s and 1990s. He would have adapted. I mean, I think David Stern. Look, you don't last 30 years in anything if you're not adaptive. If you're not listening to people who can fill you in on things. And David Stern, I think David Stern would have come around. I mean, look, I always think about the dress code, like that. He did that, and that did a 180 on that. Then the new ball, like in 2004, they
Yep.
introduced that new horrible ball that scratched
Cut
fingers. And
paper cuts.
yeah,
Yep.
eventually he's like, yeah, that was a mistake. I think David Stern was somebody who, if he knew, if money was on the line, and again, optics were on the line, he would have ultimately made the right call. And so I
Yep.
think he would have been like, I don't get this, but you know what? Fuck it. Like, let's ride this out, and we can, we'll be better for partnering with these things and embracing these things at the end of the day.
And I think that's probably the best way to end this podcast, because that is as apt of a life description of David Stern. So, Pete, thank you again for your time.
My
Thank you again
pleasure.
for this awesome book, From
Thank you.
Hang Time to Prime Time, available at all big booksellers everywhere, independent or otherwise. And, Pete, any last words before we sign off?
Yeah, a couple of things. First of all, thanks for having me. This is great. I had a blast. If
Excellent.
for anyone who buys the book, the hardcover, or eventually the paperback edition, which I hope, knock on wood, there will be one. Let's see. If you buy a copy, I'm happy to send a signed book plate.
Awesome.
Just hit me up on Twitter. I'm at Pete Croatto, PeteCroa, 2 T's as in Thomas O, at Pete Croatto. So if you get the book for a gift, buy it at a bookstore, wherever. Happy to sign a book plate. If you want an autographed copy, those are for sale as well. I'm signing books through Odyssey Bookstore, which is a wonderful independent bookstore in Ithaca, New York.
Cool.
If you go to odysseybookstore.com, you can contact the store there, and I'll personalize a copy for you, and the store will ship it anywhere in the U.S. for $5 extra. And again, that's Odyssey Bookstore, ODYSSEY bookstore.com. And I'm happy to sign any books, and the store will mail them to you.
Excellent. Thank you so much for your time, Pete, and thank you for the knowledge that you shared with us. That is just a hint of what you get in the book. I can't recommend the book enough, and look forward to hearing what comes next from you, Pete.
Thanks, Rod. I appreciate it. Have a good one.
You too.